I saw that we've got quite a few questions on the digital LSAT, so that'll be the focus for today's class. But first, I want to share with you just a little bit about who I am, why you're listening to me talk, and what we're going to be covering today. So we will be covering 2019 LSAT changes and the new digital LSAT. We'll be covering how to prep for the June and July LSATs and beyond. I'll also share some strategies on LSAT logic games for all of you today, so plenty we're going to cover. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I run the LSAT blog. I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. Now, the agenda for today, of course, is to start with the digital LSAT coming this year. So starting in 2019, in July, the LSAT is going digital. Specifically, in July, half of test takers will receive the digital format, half will receive the paper and pencil format. LSAT chooses for you, and you don't get any advance notice. I'm going to show you what the digital LSAT looks like. This is on LSAT's website, familiar.lsat.org. You can play around with one of the digital LSATs. This is Prep Test 73, and they have some cool functionalities here. You could see they have a countdown timer. You could see that they let you increase the text size if you want to, and you can increase the brightness. Now, this doesn't work on the desktop, but it does on mobile and tablet. So yes, the digital LSAT will be on a tablet, a Microsoft Surface Go specifically. And so this is the layout of a particular logic game. As you can see here, there is very little space below that, but that's totally fine because you're not doing work on the tablet. You're doing your work separately on scrap paper. And like I said, you have virtually unlimited scrap paper. So here is a digital LSAT logic game. You can see there's only one question per screen. So you have to flip ahead to the future questions and kind of go back and forth. And you can see this little black mark here telling you which question you're on. And you can click around it at a moment's notice from one to the other very seamlessly. There are some cool interactive features here. You can underline, as you can see here. You can highlight, as you can see. You can even erase what you highlighted, erase what you underlined. You can highlight in different colors. These are all cool features, and I wouldn't really bother with any of them. I think they're a huge waste of time and not going to really serve you in any way. I wouldn't bother with these. I would do your work on the side because the biggest issue is that you cannot draw freehand on the tablet the way that you could on a piece of paper. And like they give you a stylus, but I don't know what good it is really because all it lets you do is select these different functions. You can't draw freehand on it the way that you would on a piece of paper or the way that you would, let's say, on a whiteboard. So let's say if I were using a whiteboard on a tablet, for example, I could do something like this and draw whatever I wanted, like maybe make 5 slots for 5 different letters if I'm doing, like, let's say, an ordering game. But you can't do that on the digital LSAT. I don't know why not, but it is what it is. We have to deal with it. So consider the limitations that you have before you and use the scrap paper that they're giving you. And of course, practice like it's game day. I suggest getting a tablet. I hate to say that because it's a couple $100, of course, but it's well worth it. If it gets you even a single point more on the LSAT to have that increased familiarity with the tablet, it's worth it. Now, LSAT is using a Microsoft Surface Go. You don't have to use that though. You could use a Samsung Galaxy if you want. You could use an iPad if you want. Just get a stylus in particular. I think you can get one on Amazon for like $10 or even less. It's well worth practicing like it's game day. If you can't get a tablet or you want alternatives, you could get the PDFs depending on how you access them. You could then put the PDFs on a tablet, use a stylus and use the annotation feature in Preview for Mac or some other program. And that could be a useful way to get used to the format. Now, it's not all bad, though. There are a couple of good things. I think the countdown timer is somewhat useful. I think the text enlarging is somewhat useful if, let's say, you have eyesight issues or you just feel more comfortable with it. You can also increase the line spacing if you want, which might be useful for logical reasoning or reading comp, depending on what works best for you. Now, there are some questions here. I'm going to see if any of those are related once again. Bubbling. So yeah, so bubbling in at the bottom, we've got, let's say I bubbled in A, then it shows up on the bottom left. Let's say I want to eliminate choice B, it crosses off there automatically. And then if I go to question 6, I bubble that in. And let's say choice C, it bubbles in there. I can jump to 4, bubble that in. So you could do things in any order very easily and see at a glance what you've done, what you haven't. You can also flag a question. So if let's say I wanted to flag number 7, that shows up as being flagged if I want to come back to it later. So you could bubble throughout. That is a nice time-saving feature. I think the flagging is also a benefit too, to quickly see at a glance what you've done, what you haven't. So that is a plus of the digital format. So just keep that in mind. You could bubble throughout Maybe that saves you 30 seconds or a minute or two, and that's extraordinarily useful. Someone else asked about the loose leaf or scrap paper. Great question. So yes, you do get scrap paper on the digital LSAT. I think you get a booklet of maybe 8 or 10 pieces of paper, which should be plenty. That ideally, I hope, should be enough. But of course, you can't draw on the screen itself. So I guess the biggest thing I should mention with the digital format is that you cannot draw freehand on the screen itself the way you might be able to, let's say, for example, on a whiteboard. So on a whiteboard, you would be able to do something like this. On the digital LSAT, there is no functionality to let you do that. There is nothing at all like that. On the digital LSAT, there's no pen. You have the highlighter, but there's a yellow, pink, orange, but no pen function itself. So you won't be able to draw on the tablet, only on your scrap paper to the side. And so speaking of which, I want to show you a little bit of how logic games have evolved over time. So it used to be, before Prep Test 66, you had only a one-page layout for logic games. So it looked like this. If you looked at, for example, the June 2007 LSAT, it looks like this. You have your initial paragraph, you have your questions, and then you can only draw on the rest of the page here, which is something, but not a lot, of course. Of course, we all kind of wished we had more than that. Starting with exam 66, which was the June 2012 LSAT, you then had a 2-page layout for logic games, which is a lot better because now you have more than half a page on the right, about half a page on the left. So collectively, you have more than 1 page total to draw and make diagrams and notes and such, which is even better than it used to be before. But now with the digital LSAT, you will have full pages of scrap paper. So here is an example of how you might want to lay that out. So I put the rules on the left, main diagram on the right, and then your individual question diagrams kind of organized neatly in a grid. You really want to be careful to make sure that you are systematic in how you make your diagrams. You definitely do not want to draw it with one layout one time, another layout a different time, because then it can be harder to find your work later. So you see I'm clearly numbering the work for each question so that I'll be able to go back to it later. I think that's really important, just especially when you're under time pressure, to make sure you're writing neatly and you're consistent in your approach so that you can find things when you need to, especially when you want to make use of previous work. I see people are asking about techniques for digital. I used to say previously that you should not do LSAT problems on the screen. You should not use PDFs. You should print them out. You should make photocopies, whatever it is. You want to have clean copies and to draw on the page. But now, because you cannot draw on the digital LSAT, you could only work on the side. Now I would say the opposite. Use LSAT's site, use the free exam on there. They're currently using, as a free sample exam on there, Prep Test 73, which is the September 2014 LSAT. They're going to be releasing a couple more exams in the digital format soon, and then in the fall, they'll be releasing several more they recently announced. So that's great. In the meantime, if you have access to the PDFs, use them, have the PDF up on the screen, have your scrap paper on the side. Don't worry too much about how much scrap paper you use, but make sure that you're not using actual loose leaf. You're using clean white paper, 8.5 by 11 sheets, which is probably what the scrap paper will be for the digital LSAT scrap, and do your work on the side and get used to going back and forth between a screen and your paper. That's the biggest advice I would give. For those of you who like to make lots of notes in reading comp, you like to highlight and underline and circle, that's okay for paper. I still don't love it for paper anyway, but for digital, you definitely don't want to do that. It's really important to get used to minimal marking or not marking at all. I find the students who do the best on the LSAT, whether it's paper or digital, they make minimal to no markings at all. So all those tools I showed you, the underlining, the highlighting, the circling, whatever you might want to do, none of it is useful. I would steer clear of it. It takes time to write those things down or make those markings, and then you have to take time to remove them later if you don't want them. So get used to no markings and practice, with the PDFs, have the reading comp passage up on the screen, have your scrap on the side, and get used to going back and forth between the two. I have some other videos in the reading comprehension playlist on YouTube going into more depth on that, but that should handle it for now, I think. For logical reasoning, there's not much you ever want to diagram anyway. I think there are very few logical reasoning questions that are worth diagramming, maybe some sufficient assumption questions, maybe some parallel questions, some inference questions, but the vast majority, strengthen, weaken, necessary assumption, I would never diagram for those anyway, and so that really shouldn't have much of an impact there. A couple of other things I should talk about related to policy changes are that the June LSAT will be the first one where the writing sample is digital. So you're not doing it at the test center, you're doing it at home on your computer. They're monitoring you with a webcam and a microphone to just make sure it's really you. They'll have you hold up your government issued ID up to the camera, and they'll just to verify things in case of a security issue or a question about who really did this, and they'll kind of archive it there. Now the writing sample is maybe going to be slightly more important than it used to be because admission officers will be able to read it more clearly. It'll be more legible since it's typed, not handwritten. So maybe put a little more effort into it than you would have otherwise. I think you should always put effort, whether it's scored or not. I wouldn't worry about it or practice it too much, but at least look at one to get a sense of what it will be like. And also keep in mind that because it'll be digital, it'll be faster. So maybe you spend 20, 25 minutes actually writing it and spend the rest reading and proofreading or editing it. Then to go back to the digital LSAT for a moment, because it's digital, it'll also be faster to bubble in rather than having to kind of rub your number 2 pencil in a circle. You just tap with a stylus and you're good. So that'll also save you some time. So the digital LSAT is not all good or all bad. I say it's kind of a little bit of a toss-up. Now, so June LSAT, digital writing sample, everything else is paper and pencil. Then starting in July, half of test takers receive the digital LSAT, half receive the pencil. They are assigned to you. You don't get to choose, and you get no advance notice. Now, I know a number of you were taking in July, so be ready for that. Be ready for paper or digital, and you won't know in advance. One thing I should mention about the digital LSAT in July specifically is that LSAC as a one-time kind of olive branch, they will let you see your LSAT score before you decide whether to cancel. This is something that a lot of people are excited about. I think July registrations will be higher than usual because of that, but it's not really that big a deal because you should almost never cancel your LSAT score no matter what. Law schools do not average LSAT scores. They only take the highest. So if let's say you get a 160 one day, a 175 the next day, the next administration, they will take it as if you got a 175. And so if you take the July LSAT and you don't love your score, sure, you could cancel, but then admission officers will see a cancellation rather than whatever your score actually was. And a cancellation is kind of like a big question mark. So it's kind of ambiguous, and they might think for all they know, you got a 140 or a 130 versus maybe you actually got a 155 and you were just unhappy because you were your practice tests were around a 160, let's say. So I wouldn't really ever cancel, even if you can see your score first, unless something went horribly wrong or your score is more embarrassing than the question mark of a cancellation would be. Now, I saw some of you were taking it in June. If you're taking it in June, I would actually recommend taking it in July as well, no matter what. And here's why. There's only about a 5-week gap in between the June and July LSATs, meaning that you've only got to stay fresh on the LSAT for another 5 weeks. So maybe you take one additional timed practice test per week over the course of 5 weeks. You take it then again in July. Let's say you got a 160 in June, and that was your true aptitude, that was your deserved score. 160 is great, but there is a margin of error or a score band of 3.5 points on either end with your LSAT score, meaning that one day you could get, let's say, a 160. The next day you could get a 164. And obviously a 164 will open far more doors than a 160 would. So for that reason, it's well worth retaking if you think you could do better next time around. And even if you don't know whether you could or not, no big deal. It's still worth trying for it just to see, because 4 points higher makes a big difference. And let's say you don't get 4 points higher. Let's say you get a 160 again, or you get a 157. Again, not a big deal because law schools only consider your highest LSAT score. Now, I've got a playlist for those of you who might have taken the March LSAT specifically about retaking, because retaking has become more common than ever before. So I've put this link in the chat for you here. It's to my YouTube playlist. So let's say you took it in March, you're thinking of June or July, some advice on retaking there. Or if you're going to go for June, you could then go for July again. For those of you taking it in the fall, I would say if you're taking it in September, also consider October and November as well. Because just through nothing more than luck alone, you could do a few points better, and a few points better, or even just 1 point better, could lead you to get thousands of dollars more in scholarship money or get into a better law school. And so it's really a no-brainer to retake if there's any chance you could do better. Now, I've talked about the digital LSAT. I've put another YouTube playlist in the chat here. So I put a couple playlists here. There are playlists on YouTube for my YouTube channel where I have several videos on different aspects of prep. I put one playlist there for retakes, and I put another playlist there specifically about the digital LSAT. Now, the digital LSAT is going to be administered, I said, on a tablet. Specifically, it will be a Microsoft Surface Go tablet. Now, Microsoft Surface Go is expensive. It's maybe $400 or $500. It's a lot, but if it increases your level of comfort with the LSAT that you'll be taking, then I think it's well worth it. A single point more could lead to tens of thousands of dollars more in scholarship money. So it is well worth it. But if you can't do that, a Samsung Galaxy tablet is closer to around $200 or $250, a bit more affordable. Make sure you get the stylus as well. If you already have an iPad, you could use that. If you have a smartphone with a large screen, you might want to consider using that as well. I don't think it matters too much which tablet you use, but I do think it is important to use a tablet to get used to this touch screen flow of the LSAT. But of course, the content is more important than the format. And I think for most of you, you're pretty tech savvy. You'll be okay on that. Now, for those of you taking the LSAT in June, you've got not that much more time. You've got maybe a month and a half or so. Not a ton of time, but something. I hope you've already been studying for a little bit already. I'd say the minimum you want to even think of studying is 2 to 3 months, and ideally closer to 5 or 6 months. It takes about 2 to 3 months to build a baseline familiarity or foundation in the LSAT for most people, and then a few more months of refinement. So the foundation first, accuracy. That's what I want to start with. Accuracy, building your foundation, working untimed, doing questions by type. That is the first stage of your LSAT prep, of your LSAT studying, of your LSAT schedule. You work untimed by type. I recommend starting with logic games because they're the scariest section at first, but they are the most learnable. Then reasoning, then reading comp. You do them by type, untimed, by difficulty. So you do the easiest ordering games first, then the moderate difficulty ordering games, then the hardest ordering games, then the easiest grouping, moderate grouping, difficult grouping, then combination games, and so on. Then logical reasoning by question stem type, then same goes for reading comp. So you build your foundation bit by bit, doing sections and questions by type. That's phase one, accuracy. Phase two is pacing, where you do individual timed sections to get used to reaching the 35-minute mark. This is a severe time constraint. It is not reasonable. People are not meant to be able to do it in the time allotted. So you're kind of crazy or unique if you are able to do it in the time allotted, but it's worth, that's extremely important. So if let's say it's taking you an hour or 55 minutes to get there to complete the section, that's fine. Gradually reduce it, maybe a minute at a time, maybe 2 minutes at a time, gradually doing section after section to gradually decrease your timing down to the 35-minute mark. The final phase is endurance, doing full-length 5-section timed exams. That's hard. Anyone's brain will be fried after they do that. Mine certainly is, even now, still after doing that. It's a long time because 5 35-minute sections is about 3+ hours, including the 10-minute break in the middle. So you have 3 sections back to back, then a 10-minute break, then 2 more sections back to back. It used to be then you would also have to do the writing sample after that at the test center. But again, going forward, starting in June, that will no longer be the case. You will be able to do the writing sample at home. You have up to 1 year to do it after your LSAT administration. And if you've already done a writing sample before, if you've taken the LSAT previously, you don't have to do it again. Although you do have the option to, if you pay a fee of $15, they'll let you do another writing sample administration at home. So again, accuracy, pacing, endurance, Those are the 3 phases of LSAT prep. Once you finish the accuracy phase and you start going into pacing, it's also still worthwhile to do any weak areas, to focus on those as well. So let's say there was one game type that gave you trouble or one logical reasoning question type that gave you trouble. You could still drill those by type afterwards. And as you move on to logical reasoning, you do still want to stay fresh on logic games as well. You don't want to get rusty on it. So in my study plans, I actually have I share with you exactly what to do and when to do it. So let's say the first week was logic games, and then week 2 was logical reasoning. You do still cycle in games as well to stay fresh on them. And then once you move on to reading comp, you still stay fresh on games and reasoning at the same time. And then, of course, as you're moving into pacing endurance, continue working on weak areas and also your endurance, plus detailed review. This is one of the most neglected aspects of the LSAT study process, is the review process. So you want to look at not only what you're getting wrong, but also whatever gives you trouble. And you don't want to fall into the trap of simply taking exam after exam, measuring your results, being happy or sad about them, and moving on. It's certainly great to take timed exams, but the real value in doing the timed exams is not simply to measure yourself. It's to learn from your mistakes so that you don't make them again. So for any problem that gives you trouble or that you have difficulty with, you want to see what was tempting about the wrong answer choice that made you pick it or consider it, and what ultimately makes it wrong. And what is discouraging about the right answer choice that pushed you away from it, and what ultimately makes it correct. You want to do this again and again and again, not necessarily for every single question you ever get wrong or have difficulty with, but certainly for the hardest ones, the biggest ones. And I do think that there's a value in doing it for most of these. You could either write it out by hand in a notebook, keep a mistake log or a journal. You could write it on the computer in let's say a Google Doc. You could articulate it with a friend, or share it with a friend, have a study group or a tutor. Somebody you could talk through these problems with is extraordinarily useful to force yourself to really engage with your study process and what you've been doing. So I'm happy to answer follow-up questions on that, of course, but that's pretty much the layout on that. I say you want to make sure you take days off as you're studying. You don't want to risk burning out. So my study plans, I also work in off days, rest days, maybe 2 or 3 a week. If you're working or you're in school, you want to study at least 10, 15 hours a week minimum, ideally closer to 20, and carve out the time wherever you can. So before work, if you're working, during lunch, after work, and before work specifically, wake up, shower, eat breakfast, exercise, whatever you do in your routine, get to work, find a conference room nearby in your office or a coffee shop nearby, and study there when you're in work mode, in your work clothing, not when you're home in your PJs and you have distractions. During lunch, if you can carve out a half hour here or there, great. If you have downtime at work, great. You could watch YouTube videos, you could listen to the podcast, you could do some practice problems online, whatever it is, find it where you can. After work, before you go home for the day and you get into your PJs, stay at work, in the conference room, in the coffee shop nearby, put in another 2 to 3 hours and grab a sandwich or something, just so you can keep focusing on getting your work done. Because once you get home, you have Netflix, Facebook, your phone, your computer, friends, family. They'll all distract you and prevent you from getting the studying done. If you're in school, treat it like it's a 6-credit class or more. The LSAT is that important. It's kind of funny that you earn your undergraduate GPA over the course of 3, 4, 5 years, but that's less important than your LSAT score. So why would you spend only 2 to 3 months on it? You should spend closer to 5 to 6 at a minimum. It took me over a year to reach my 175, but I studied inefficiently for a lot of it. So I don't think it should take you quite as long. I think that 5 to 6 months is reasonable for you to reach your fullest potential. People often underestimate just how hard this exam is and how much it requires of you. But it's not like anything you've ever done previously. It's not like the SAT. You didn't learn any of this in high school or in college. It's another beast altogether. It's a way of thinking. It's a mindset. It's a language. It's testing your ability to be critical and skeptical, and also your short-term working memory. And these are muscles. They can be trained. They can be improved, but it takes time. And there are plenty of LSAT resources out there. There are nearly 100 released LSAT exams. And I'm not saying you should do all of them. You don't need to. I think even just doing a couple dozen would be plenty if you reviewed them in sufficient depth. And that involves the review process I talked about earlier. You could even use only 10 exams ever, and that would be enough to allow you to get a sense of what the LSAT involves and gain the insights you need to kind of get the rhythm of this exam and what it entails. Now, I thought since some of you are taking the LSAT fairly soon in June and July, I thought I might go over some LSAT test day mistakes that you want to avoid. So these are my 7 biggest mistakes that you want to avoid. The first couple deal with stress reduction. So the first is, I don't want you to think that it's all about this one test that you're registered for. Because the LSAT as a whole, of course, is incredibly important, but no one particular LSAT test date will make or break you. You always have future opportunities to retake. And so for those of you, again, taking in June, if you register for July as well, it could give you a tremendous amount of peace of mind so that you at least know, well, if June doesn't happen for you, you have another shot at it only 5 weeks later. The other thing I would say next is letting go. I don't want you to get bogged down or stressed on one particular question or section when you've already moved on from it. Let's say number 17 gave you trouble. You go on to number 18, but 17 is still kind of eating you up inside because you're thinking, oh my God, like I missed number 17 and I missed this other number 12. And then the last section, something else went wrong. And you're thinking, oh my God, my score is going to plummet. You can miss a couple questions and still do great. The average 170 scorer gets 10 questions wrong, which is crazy because there's 100 on the exam approximately. So a 90% accuracy rate could give you a 97th percentile score. So that just shows you how hard this exam is. Missing a few is okay. And so you don't want to get bogged down on tough questions in the moment either and think it's the end of the world, because you can miss a couple or skip a couple and come back to them later. The digital LSAT actually has a flagging function where you can mark off questions you want to return to at the end. And personally, I'll skip 3 to 5 logical reasoning questions in the moment, trusting that I'll be able to come back to them later. And I typically do because my pacing is good, but even if you don't, those were the toughest questions anyway, where your odds were the lowest. So I'd say, don't worry, flag them, and get into the rhythm with your pacing of blasting through the easiest questions in logical reasoning so that you'll have a time bank built up for the tougher ones that come later. Logical reasoning questions are presented in a general order of difficulty, and so that kind of gives you an insight into which ones will be harder and easier. I'd aim to do the first 10 and maybe 12 minutes or so for the average person, and then that gives you a couple minutes at the end, hopefully, to return to the toughest ones that you flagged. There are a couple of silly mistakes that people make on test day as well. When you go into the test center, you have to bring a government-issued ID. That should be government ID, not your university ID. And so make sure that you have a driver's license or a state ID, and that it is not expired, and that the name on the ID matches the name on your admission ticket precisely. So if there's a misspelling in one of them, or you got married and changed your name, or changed your name for some other reason, whatever it is, get that squared away now. Go on LSAC's site, make sure that your name with them is the same as the name on your government ID, and double check your admission ticket as well to make sure that those match also. If they don't, contact LSAC immediately. You can email them at lsacinfo@lsac.org, and it might take a little while to get back to you, so reach out now if you're taking the exam soon. Another silly mistake I see is people waiting until the end of the section to bubble. Each section is 35 minutes, and on the paper LSAT, when you're bubbling with a pencil, it may take a couple of minutes just to do the bubbling. It's crazy, but you might, if you actually added up all the bubbling for 25 or 27 questions, it could take maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes, and that adds up. And so if you're waiting till the end, it would be awful if you didn't actually get to bubble in everything you completed before they call time. And the proctors are supposed to give you a 5-minute warning, but hey, they're human. They don't always do it. On the digital LSAT, though, this won't be a concern because there is a countdown timer, so it's automated. The 5-minute warning is also automated, and bubbling is as simple as tapping your stylus, and so it's not really taking you much time at all. Another silly mistake is focusing on other people before the exam and during the exam. You don't want other people stressing you out. You might overhear them say something that kind of rubs you the wrong way. Maybe they say that they didn't study much and were doing great, or maybe they're scoring much higher than you are, or maybe they tell you something that you didn't know that stresses you out. Whatever it could be, there other people are a wild card. And so I recommend, if you can, stay away from them at the test center, focus on yourself, focus on your practice problems. And so I'd suggest actually Speaking of that, bring some practice problems with you to the test center as a warm-up. It could be a favorite logic game, a couple logical reasoning questions, nothing too difficult, nothing you haven't seen before, but just as a way to kind of get you warmed up that day so that the first scored sections you're doing on test day are not actual LSAT problems. So keep that in mind. And finally, the last thing I would say on this is don't try out anything new on test day itself. Try to make it just another practice test. And I recommend, by the way, taking at least 10 full-length timed exams in the lead up to test day as 5 sections, not 4. You can create these by taking one exam, like let's say you're doing exams 83, 84, 85, and 86 as your full-length timed exams. You could take exam number 82, divide it into 4 parts, and splice them into each of exams 83, 84, 85, and 86, and then later tally your results for exam 82 to see what it might have been had you taken it under timed conditions. So you take these 10 timed exams, then you walk it on test day, it's just another test. It's test number 11, and you've gone through 10 sittings of 3 hours or more. So test day itself, you've got plenty of experience under your belt to bring to bear on the official administration. And once again, go in knowing that this is not your make or break. There's always a future opportunity to take another LSAT test. They've gone from offering it, again, 4 times a year to 9 or 10 times a year. So there's always another one in just a month or two. You don't have to wait too long on that. Now, make sure that when you're doing these timed exams, that you're properly simulating test day conditions. So no being casual with the timing, no giving yourself 40 minutes when there's only 35 minutes because this one problem gave you trouble and you made a stupid mistake at the beginning. It counts. It's all real. It's all 35 minutes. That's what everything is timed. So no breaks for the bathroom, no breaks to get a glass of water. Everything is on the clock. And no checking your answers question by question or section by section. You're not going to be able to do it on test day, so don't do it now. You can even have a friend proctor you. A lot of test prep companies offer free proctored exams for marketing purposes. And so you might go to one of them and just kind of bring your own exam if you want, or use theirs. And you could sit through the sales pitch and tune it out if you want, but at least you get them to proctor the exam for you. You get the strict timing and the real test day-like experience. The week before, you take a timed exam, maybe the weekend before, you do a few sections of review that week. Then let's say you're taking the exam on a Saturday, you take your final exam on Wednesday or Thursday, you review it that day or the following day. Friday, you rest, you do nothing. Then Saturday, you walk in and you just kill it. You just go in and give it your all. Whatever it is, and you can retake if you need to, but you know that at least you've done everything you could have up to that point. Now, I've got another YouTube playlist for you. This is specifically on a test day prep. So this is a playlist specifically for test day prep, how to simulate test day conditions, how to deal with nerves and anxiety, and what to do in the lead up, the week before, the week after, the month before, and what to bring, what not to bring, everything of that nature. So a lot of playlists for you there. If you didn't get that before, if you want to check those out. I'll open it up to Q&A in just a few, but before I do that, I want to share a couple of things with you. So for those of you here in New York, I teach free LSAT classes all the time. These are some photos from some recent classes I taught. I taught one on games. One was a general meetup to help organize study groups. I'll be teaching many more in the future. So those are some resources for you if you want to check those out. I'm also teaching a live weekend LSAT class here in New York City next month. It'll be May 18th and May 19th in downtown Brooklyn. So for those of you who are in New York or able to easily get here, that is an option for you. So if you're thinking about that, make sure to take action on that. This is an application-only program, so I'll share the link with you here. If you're interested, email me or fill out an application, and I'll consider whether you're going to be a good fit for the program. That's a weekend, 2-day intensive, 5 hours Saturday, 5 hours Sunday. I'm also teaching a live online LSAT masterclass, and this is for those of you in New York or outside of New York and not able to easily get to Brooklyn. This is a small group setting, and here's the full schedule of what I'm covering. As you can see, it already started, but I have the recordings, so you can watch the recordings midway through if you want to catch up. It's every Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. The class is like this. It's over this software, Zoom. You can connect via phone, tablet, computer, whatever. We'll walk through actual LSAT problems on the digital LSAT like this here. As you can see me clearly and hear me clearly. You can see the problems as well. We're walking through real recent LSAT problems together. The coming weeks we'll be talking about on Monday, how to take full-length timed exams and review. We'll cover recent LSAT problems, test day prep, last minute questions. And I'll even, for those of you taking it in June, I'll cover what to do after the LSAT, next steps, law school admissions and retakes, and so on. I've got a bunch of low-cost written LSAT prep materials. These are the schedules I mentioned, day-by-day study plans. These are the most popular prep book on my site. You go to the top, click books, you'll find it there. I'll share the link with you here in the chat as well. I have schedules, cheat sheets, guides, checklists, vocabulary builder, explanations. I also have full video courses for every section of the LSAT on demand. So for those of you who can't attend the live classes, I have the recorded ones here. And so you can see I have video courses and a mix of written materials as well. So plenty of resources for any aspect, for whatever prep works best for you. I've got you covered on that. And so that's enough about me. I'm going to open this up now to a general Q&A on anything at all I've covered. So I'm looking through the questions that were previously asked here in the chat. Someone said, because the digital LSAT has some easier functions, is it meant to be more lengthy and complex? And is it timed? The digital LSAT format will not change at all from how it's been previously. So it'll still be, the games will be equal difficulty, the logical reasoning, equal difficulty, reading comprehension, equal difficulty. I think that the benefits of the digital tablet with bubbling being faster, the countdown timer being automated, I think those are kind of balanced out by maybe the unfamiliarity of the digital format. And so I don't think they're going to make it any more difficult to compensate. And I think that they're doing everything they can to make sure that digital LSAT results are equated with the paper and pencil. So people will do roughly similarly on either one. I don't think it's meant to be more difficult or easier either. I think it's meant to be exactly the same either way. And is it timed? Yes, the digital LSAT is timed just as the paper and pencil is timed. The only difference is that it'll be on the tablet, but I think it'll all be, you'll be synced with everyone else in the room. And so it'll be the same as no matter what. Somebody asked, if I'm barely going to be a junior in college, when should I begin taking the LSAT? Well, it depends on when you're planning to apply to law school. I'd say if you're planning to apply to law school within the next couple of years, you could take it soon. You could take it now. The LSAT scores are good for up to 5 years. And so if you're still in college and you want to take a year or two off before going to law school, you could take it now and the scores will be good. The benefit there is that you're still in kind of academic study mode, and maybe you have summers off, maybe you have a lighter course load. Once you are working full time and you're no longer in school, it'll be really tough to balance work and study and life all together, especially if you have a family or if you have a busy work schedule. A lot of my students are paralegals and they're really overworked. You know, they're working long hours, they're working overtime, they're making good money, but you can't study for the LSAT when you're getting home from work at 1 or 2 a.m. Believe it or not, paralegals do work that long sometimes when there's a case coming up. And so when you're working as a paralegal, you can't really fit in the time so easily. A lot of students who are paralegals, they postpone, they delay. They have to study for the LSAT over a very long period of time because they just can't devote the time. So while you're in college, I think this is the easiest time you'll ever have to actually get the studying done. And so, yeah, I'd say cramming the time where you can specifically. I think it's important to do it while you're in college if you can, because if you have summers off, or you could take a lighter course load one semester. Let's say you're taking the LSAT in the fall. You could take a partial course load, maybe part-time, or maybe only 4 classes or 12 credits, so that you can treat the LSAT as if it's at least a 6-credit class. It is that important. I think it's actually more important than 6 credits, but reasonably speaking, 10, 15 hours a week, that is a good amount of time. And I think in college, it's easier to do that than when you're working, because then when you're working, you then only have your weekends off. And the last thing you want to do when you have only 2 days off is to devote those 2 days to nothing but studying. It does become a bit exhausting. Someone asked, do I have a written list of resources I can email, such as the videos in class and external resources? Yes, I do. I can email that to everybody after this class session ends. And so don't worry, I'll make sure to share those all with you. Somebody asked, is the olive branch of seeing one's score also extended to those taking paper and pencil format in July? Yes, LSAC is letting everybody who takes the July LSAT, whether it's paper or digital, get the chance to see your score before deciding whether to cancel. And that's because you're registering for July. You don't know what you're going to get. And so that's kind of a little bit ambiguous and intimidating for some folks. And so they're being nice by letting you do that. Although I think, like I said, it's not really a big deal because law schools don't average multiple scores. So there's really no benefit to cancellations. And the cancellation being a question mark could be worse than whatever score you actually got. I suppose one thing I should mention, though, is that folks who cancel their scores in July, they will get a free retake as well. So they'll save $190 if they do want to retake it. I see that one person actually just said that exact same thing in the chat there. So you're absolutely right. We're on the same page on that one. An LSAT diagnostic test is really tempting to want to take because you want to see how you would do now. You want to see where you're at and see how hard the LSAT is for you and what's going to be involved. But the thing is that most people are going to do terribly on their diagnostic tests because it's like I said earlier, it's a foreign language. You've got to learn the basics first and build your foundation first. And so when I took my first diagnostic, I got a 152. And I'd gone to an Ivy League college. I thought I was going to go to a top 14 law school. And so that diagnostic test, the results were really discouraging for me. And I stayed in the low 150s for a long time. And it was only through my review process that I started to improve, but it took months. And so if you take a cold diagnostic and do badly, I don't want you to take that as being an indication of your LSAT potential or your self-worth or anything of that nature. All it tells you is that you don't know the LSAT yet, but you will learn it over time. So either don't take a diagnostic, or if you do, take it with like 1,000 or 10,000 grains of salt. It really is not meaningful of anything. And as far as the diagnostic helping you identify your weak areas, I think there's no point to that because everybody has weak areas on the LSAT no matter what, and they're mostly going to be the same. You don't know how to do logic games, and logical reasoning and reading comp are also not where you're going to want them to be. That's pretty much the case for everybody except a few natural born geniuses out there. The LSAT is a foreign language. You haven't done anything like it before, so it's natural that it's not going to go well the first or even the second or third times around. So start with the basics, foundation first, accuracy, doing questions untimed by type, then you do your pacing, and then finally you do your endurance. And so for those of you who wanted to find out more on the study plans, I'll share with you the link again here. And for those of you who wanted the free videos on reading comp and other topics, there's a link to the YouTube channel, as well as a link to the podcast if you want to find out more on any of those. So again, no diagnostics yet. That's putting the cart before the horse. Build the foundation first. Now, for those of you who someone asked a question here, building stamina for studying after long work days. So if you're studying in the evening, you're likely to be tired. You're not likely to perform at your best. So I'd recommend if you're working, study at work or at a coffee shop nearby before you get home. Because once you get home, you eat dinner, then you're tired from dinner and you're in a food coma, or you're just exhausted because it's later at night now. And you don't do your best when you're tired. It's just a fact. The LSAT requires giving it your all. And so if anything is out of whack, you're overworked, you're stressed, you're not sleeping well, you're not eating well, not exercising, not relaxing, your performance is going to suffer, and you may even get depressed. So, or burn out. So you want everything to be in check, having the balance of sleeping well, eating well, exercising, and taking time for relaxation. And so that means not studying for the LSAT between the hours of like 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., then going to bed, waking up at 6 a.m. and repeating. That is not conducive to good LSAT performance. You want instead to study when you're more awake, which means not when you first wake up and not right before you go to bed, somewhere in the middle. So that's why I said at work, in a conference room, in your office, or at a coffee shop near your office, once you've already commuted to work. Then if you can during lunch, if you have a break at work or you have some downtime at work, and then more on the weekends. So maybe 2 to 3 hours a day on weekdays, then 5 hours a day on at least one weekend day, and then you have one day off. So let's say an hour before work, an hour during lunch, and 2 hours after work, some sort of mix like that. And then on the weekend, if you have like a full day to do nothing but study, here's what it could look like. You wake up, shower, eat breakfast, exercise, then study from, let's say, the hours of 9 to 12 or 9:30 to 12:30. Take a break for lunch for an hour, 12:30 to 1:30. Then put in another 3 hours, 1:30 to 4:30, and that's it. So you studied 9:30 to 12:30, then again from 1:30 to 4:30. That's all you need. 6 hours is plenty if you're studying properly, if you're not distracted. And so I have some techniques for not getting distracted. There's a technique called the Pomodoro technique, which basically has you block off when you take breaks so that you're not tempted to take breaks during your studying. So you study for 25 minutes, then take a 5-minute break, then repeat. There is an app called the Focus app. It's available on smartphones and tablets and such. You could search the Apple Store. Then you go on there. It builds this in for you where you have segmented periods of time of study and periods of rest. So you don't check your phone now because you know that you have an opportunity to check your phone, email, Facebook, whatever, at the 25-minute mark, but not before. But you know it's coming up, so you can look forward to it. But in the meantime, you focus on your studies. So that's. I hope that answered that question there. As for stamina, I mean, in general, you build up your endurance bit by bit. So let's say you're doing timed exams. I talked about 5-section timed exams, which are what you'll do on test day, but the published administrations are only 4 exams because that's all they release. So you could do your first timed exam as a 4-section exam with a 10-minute break in the middle. So 35, 35, 10-minute break, 35 again, 35 more, and that's it. Then the following time, a week later, then you do 5 sections, but you just build up bit by bit. So let's say you study at first for an hour, then an hour 10, then an hour 20, then an hour 30. Then you build up to 2 hours and so on bit by bit in 10 or 15-minute increments. Start now, and ideally you're not taking the LSAT soon so that you have 2 to 3 months to build up to this. And same goes for something like waking up early. Let's say you currently wake up at 9 a.m., but your LSAT's going to be at 9 a.m. And so you certainly can't wake up when the exam is starting. You want to wake up maybe at 7:30 or 7 or 6:30. So you move it back bit by bit, maybe 10, 15 minutes at a time till you get back to your goal time for waking up. And then of course you want to take your practice tests at the same time you'll be taking them on test day. So I believe the June exam is in the afternoon. So you want to take your timed exams in the afternoon and practice what kind of lunch you'll eat before that, or when you'll drinking your coffee, for example. You want to have all of that routine established now in doing your timed practice tests so that you'll be good for test day, having it be just another practice test type experience. All right, so if nothing else, I will leave off here. Once again, I'm Steve Schwartz. I run the LSAT blog. I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. So a couple of resources for you. The free resources on my site covering games, reasoning, reading comp, totally free. Go to the LSAT blog, just Google it or click the link in the chat, and you'll find the free stuff tab. Then you'll find the details there to all the other sections with games, again, games, logic games, logical reasoning, reading comprehension, and so on. I have the study schedules as well. I've got the YouTube channel, youtube.com/LSAT blog, the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and pretty much everywhere else. I have low-cost study resources, schedules, cheat sheets, guides, checklists, vocab builder, explanations, and so on. I have the on-demand video courses. I have the live online LSAT masterclass. I have the live weekend class here in New York City, application only. So reach out if you want to join that. And yeah, of course, email me as well, lsatunplugged@gmail.com. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions I can on anything at all. LSAT or law school admissions. I really am a real person. I will respond to you. And so again, I hope that was helpful for everyone. Please keep in touch. And if you need anything, let me know. All the best with your prep and take care.